Now, when we were talking pre this, you said that you're in finance, but you spent most of your time to get out of finance. What's going on?
I don't really mind what I do, but I don't want to work in finance. And then from there, somehow still in finance, despite kind of trying to get out of it a few times.
What is something that you see, or when you look across the portfolio, you wish people did maybe a bit earlier, or they might be leaving something a bit too late?
I always think people don't put people first. You can get as much money through the door, you can do great deals, but you're going to struggle to do those things because you haven't got the right people. So for me, it is always people first.
So if there's one thing that sort of founders listening could do today off the back of this, what would you suggest?
I mean, I would always say carve out some time for it, because that's the hardest bit. There's never a good time to sit down and do this people stuff, because there's always time sensitive, deal related work going on, or things that, seem more important. But I would say if you put the time aside to actually put some structure around this, it will pay off, 10 times over.
Hi, I'm James Johnson, founder and CEO coach, and this is the Peer Effect podcast, where your peers tell you how they're unlocking their 10 million plus business. My guest today is Rachel Townend. She's the Chief of Staff and General Partner at Illuminate Financial. They're a VC specialising in enterprise software and fintech, and they're now on their fourth fund. This is the episode for you if you're thinking about a performance framework for your business and when is the right time to implement it. So Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Now,
when we were talking pre this, you said that you're in finance, but you spent most of your time to get out of finance. What's going on?
Yeah, when I first moved to London, which was, about 18 years ago now, I remember going to a temp agency and saying, I don't really mind what I do. I was a generalist even at that point, but I don't want to work in finance. And so they came along and they said, oh, well, there's this temp opportunity at a hedge fund. You get a free massage once a week. You get free Kit Kats and Coca-Colas. The offices are really nice. The pay's really good. And I was like, well, I could be persuaded then. And then from there, somehow still in finance, despite kind of trying to get out of it a few times, going to work for some entrepreneurs in different industries, but did soon realise it's all about the people you work with. And I like the environment of kind of super passionate, driven, bright people. Yeah. Generalisation, of course, but yeah. So here I am, and the entrepreneurial stuff definitely stuck. That's why I'm where I am now, kind of almost 12 years later.
Yes, amazing. You've been at Illuminate since 2014.
Exactly. I joined the founder in his flat, sort of day one, employee number one.
Wow. Now, so you're a general partner at Illuminate Financial. What is something that you see, or when you look across the portfolio, you wish people did maybe a bit earlier, or they might be leaving something a bit too late?
I mean, so I cover everything at Illuminate not everything, but I cover a lot at Illuminate that is not on the investment side. So that's my sort of super skill as such. I've often thought about whether I want to delve into the world of finance more, but my view is we've got a whole team of experts there, so therefore I should be focusing on, everything that is kind of on the ops side, the HR side, making us more efficient and improving processes. So my view is always going to be from that vantage point, and I always think people don't put people first, because my view is if you don't have the right people in the right seats, you can get as much money through the door, you can do great deals, but you're going to struggle to do those things because you haven't got the right people. So for me, it is always people first. So whether that's your first employee or everything that comes after that, because it's a multiplier effect. If you get good people from the start, you're going to attract good people, you're going to keep good people. So it's all about the people for me.
And so how do you see that actually playing out? So you've got, you're a good example. You were, so you say, employee number one. That has sort of, you guys now in your fourth fund. It's all going really well. So there's kind of that sort of positive momentum from that first hour, right? What are you seeing in maybe some of the portfolio around getting it wrong? Because it feels like you go for the first key hire. Everyone say, oh, we try and hire well in the first stages. How's that not working?
I mean, I think some of it is planning and process and being very thoughtful about it, but some of it, of course, is luck. You know, I know with Illuminate, we've had the same team for 10 years with our partners, and we're incredibly lucky that those people walked through the door when they did, and that they have stayed. But then, you know, when you're going out looking for people to join your team, it's just being thoughtful about how you do that. So, you know, where you're going looking for those people, how you're doing your interview process, you know, putting a lot more thought around how you do that. The actual onboard, which, you know, so many people forget about because it's just, oh, great, they're here now, let's just give them lots of work. And it makes it a lot harder down the line if you then have to sort of, well, either help people because they're your star performers or manage them because they're not. You need that strong onboarding and that strong structure around exactly what the role is and what's needed from it, and the roles and responsibilities, the accountability, etc. So I think it's the whole package, really. You know, great people do attract great people, as I said. So, of course, some funds and companies are going to find it easier to attract talent because everybody wants to work there. But I think the majority of us, it's not necessarily like that. And so you have to kind of, you have to be on a sell mode as much as you do just trying to think about all of the stuff behind the scenes.
So it sounds like it's quite a sort of deliberate process. Sounds almost quite a time-consuming process.
Yeah, I think it is. And the challenge is trying to get other people in the team to see that, because it's not an exciting deal. It's not an event, you know, which produces fun photos for social media or things like that. And so I think it's super important, but sometimes the fruits of your labour don't come to fruition until 2 years down the line. So there's a lot of stuff, you know, that I put a lot of work into that, you know, people only see the value of that later on. And sometimes you don't, you know, people could be like, oh, well, I'm not attributing it to that. So it's not sort of tangible as such. And that makes it a challenge to get people invested in that.
Okay, so the payoff of that work is kind of down the line. Or I suppose the penalty of getting it wrong can feel down the line as well. And in the moment, it's kind of like, I've got some big project to work on. This is going to take me time. I've got a good instinct for people. I know who the right person is. Let's just go for them.
And don't get me wrong, that can work. As in, you know, I suspect that's what happened with my interview. That you know, somebody introduced me to our founder. And I felt like I interviewed him more than he interviewed me, but it worked, right? We were incredibly lucky, but sometimes that does work. But I think a lot of the time, you have to do a bit more than that.
I imagine as a VC saying to your portfolio companies, leaving one of the biggest things that drives your success to luck would probably not be something that you would recommend.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, you know, this day and age, it's a very different process, isn't it? It's not like the old days where it was like, oh, well, you know, can you hire my son or daughter, or, you know, like, I know this person, or they went to this school, or those sorts of things, thank goodness. But so, yeah, a lot more goes into it.
So what tangible do you think does go into it? So we talked about sort of onboarding. I know beforehand we were talking about sort of looking at both performance and behaviour. What would, you're a busy company, you're scaling, what can you rely on to make these decisions better? Are you suggesting there is sort of a framework underlying it?
I think some people definitely have a very strong framework. I'd say we're somewhere in the middle. You know, lots of people use things like questionnaires now and personality testing and those sorts of things for fit as well as the competency. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think testing somebody's motivations and what makes them tick, I think, is super useful. And there is, you know, we've definitely done some personality testing in the business to see how teams work together and how people work together. I remember doing one, Emergenetics, where it's really helped me working with one of the partners because we are so different. And so I often look at the two profiles and it tells you kind of how to work with that person. And it's just a useful reminder when you're kind of banging heads, the things to think about and how they think and stuff like that. So I think that's useful once you're in the business, but I'm not sure I'd use it for hiring. We definitely kind of standardized questions and added case studies and tried to make the process kind of the same for every candidate. We looked at doing sort of blind hiring, but we haven't quite got to that point. But we definitely did anonymized kind of stages until the final stages to look at CVs when it came to interns and things like that. So there wasn't any bias in there, which is quite laborious when you don't have. We looked at different softwares as well to use for that. But as with everything, nothing's perfect. So I've definitely trialled a few things along the way, but we've evolved it over time, and I think it's better than it was. But I think you still always need that time for just general discussion and conversation as well. And it's always a balance of trying to work out who does the interviews, because when you're small, certain roles, people all want to sort of still do the interviews before making the hire. I think we've just moved past that now, but it took a while because when it's when it feels like your own sort of company, it's hard to sort of let go with many things.
I think one of the great things about VCs is that in many ways they are startup scale-ups, investing in startup scale-ups, and so a lot of the lessons you learn can really apply. And it's great to have someone like a lot of startups won't have someone like you who can sort of really invest that time and think about some of these ops stuff. So from the lessons that you've learned within Illuminate and within the portfolio, what sort of 3 things would you say, okay, well, these really work for us when it comes to getting the people bit right? For sort of scale-up founders listening, what do you think they should copy?
Yeah, I mean, because I always call my sort of back office, I always see the problems. So, of course, I'm always going to be thinking, what can we do better? And I think that's my nature anyway. I'm always sort of told, you're a perfectionist, etc. And I'm like, no, I just like things to be done well. So a lot of my, I can look at things in terms of what we did well, but then for me, it's, there's always what could we have done better. So I think when we started the business, a lot of us had left big financial institutions, consultancies, hedge funds. We knew what we didn't want from a culture, and that was pretty fundamental when we started the business. So we did spend a lot of time on kind of culture and values early days, which I think was really important. And we had a lot of fun with it as well. It's probably 2015 we created a lot of things that we still use today. We have some awards, which we do every quarter for sort of excellence, Einstein for sort of great ideas, Guardian of PD for kind of mentorship and helping others, and the Numpty Award of sort of learning from mistakes. We've got a series of animals who kind of embody, values and cultural sort of behaviours that we want to foster from the team. And so we definitely put into that a lot of that at the start, and also made sure we had a lot of fun, which is easier when you are small and, young and nimble. But I think it was really important because it gets you through then the hard times, when you're really busy, or when the worst comes out in people when you're stressed. You have that kind of underlying structure and kind of culture behind you. So I think that was super important to kind of agree that at the start. I think in terms of learning, I think we probably, a core group of us knew all of that. We talked about it when people started, but I think we got to a point where we didn't talk about it then as much because some of us just knew it. And then you can become a bit complacent. And so I think you almost then go full circle where you think, actually, we need to hone down on behaviours again and our cultural elements. And I think there's always a time when you need to look back anyway, because you need to speak to the team and go, do we embody these cultural values and behaviours, or is it just on paper? Because if we're not, then let's change them, and we want everybody's input. So I think we did that a couple of years ago, but we're probably due to do it again. I think it's ever evolving, basically, because the business evolves. Why wouldn't that kind of stuff? So I think, yeah, that's some stuff we've done well, but equally we can always do better.
Because there's, you say, like, those behaviours and values can evolve and depend on what business needs are at stage. But I suppose one thing I've experienced with founders is sometimes they come to this stuff quite late, in terms of the early hires are based a bit on gut feeling, people they know. There's a bit of gratitude around people joining them on their journey. And then they start hitting the scale up phase, and some of those sort of almost unspoken rules in the head of like, oh, we're lucky for you to join us, actually become a bit of a limiting factor, because it starts getting in the way of accountability, starts getting in the way of like decent hiring processes. And so the founders almost need to take a step back and go, what is the culture we want? And are we willing to hold people a bit more accountable? This has become a bit more of a thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult, because you then do go into the world of performance, behaviours, trust, and what is acceptable and what isn't. And, someone is an incredibly good performer. Is it okay that they're not behaving, in a way that they should? For Illuminate, no, it's not okay, because actually it's not necessarily just about that individual. It's the impact on the wider team, and the fairness point. And it's so destructive in many, many ways. But I think for a lot of organisations, they'd turn a blind eye because it's also easier. I think giving feedback on behaviour is much harder, and therefore I think a lot of people avoid it. I think we've definitely learned to be more structured with our feedback. I think that's another learning along the way. I think early days it was very much just as and when, and I think it often is as you kind of start companies. And then I put in a piece of software called Appraised for more sort of structured check-ins, etc. But we've definitely played around with different matrices for how to assess an individual, because our team, they're kind of crying out for something they can kind of look at to go, right, what gets me to the next stage, especially investment team, because it's so structured. I think, in different roles, it's not quite that way, but people want to know, what do I have to do to get to the next level? And it's not quite as straightforward as that, because you have people who have spikes in certain areas, and people who are kind of, more sort of soldiers or all-rounders. And then you have the behaviours piece as well, which, depending on the organisation, whether you care about that or not. I mean, I definitely meet people particularly in finance, who are like, we don't have issues with behaviour because it's either you conform or you're out. It's kind of the sort of old school manner. And so they say, well, the people who come to us to interview, they know what they're getting themselves in for. I think if you're slightly more flexible in approach and work with people, then there can be challenges to that as well.
Yeah. And I think something you said there, like, I think people are less comfortable having certain conversations, because often we just don't have the language to do it. Like, it feels, and it's a bit more, can feel a bit more subjective. Kind of performing, not performing in most roles is mostly quantifiable. When you start talking about behaviours, it becomes, I think even our personal lives, behaviours are harder to talk about. Definitely.
I think some are very easy, because you're like, okay, you weren't paying attention in that meeting, like, why are you always on your laptop? Sort of, can you stop doing that type thing? But other ones, you could view something and perceive it some way, someone else another way, and therefore, it's the examples are harder, and everybody wants examples, but also everyone has that fear of kind of upsetting someone or hurting someone, or in this world, sadly, saying something that's going to get you in trouble with HR or those sorts of things. So I think it is challenging, and I've had many scenarios where you walk out of a room and one person heard one thing and you thought you said another. And so I always write everything down and then kind of also send it to the person, because it allows, if there was miscommunication, at least you can talk about it in the moment rather than something festering when it wasn't meant to be the way it was said or meant, or those sorts of things, because I think that can cause a lot of problems as well.
Yeah, and I think on the behaviour thing, I think often having as you become a bigger company, when you're small, you say you've got like that founding team, and the founders kind of set the cultural tone, and there's only two levels, and it's kind of founders and everyone else, and therefore these things don't really creep in because you've almost got the umpire there straight away to like arbitrate. I think once you get into scale up mode and you've got management layers, that puts a whole nother level of complexity in, because the founders feel like they're sort of disconnected from the front line, and the front line, then you've got the managers kind of arbitrating, but if they don't have the knowledge, they're kind of sometimes guessing what the founder would do in that situation. So I think having a framework where you can go, this is what good looks like, this is what good doesn't look like, enables you to scale, because it gives managers a bit more clarity. It gives everyone more clarity around what's expected.
Yeah, I think the size we've been quite lucky where, again, we, until more recently, we hadn't had much of a turnover. And because of how much we cared about the fit piece in the hiring process, we have had, incredible managers who've embodied all of those kind of cultural behaviours. But I think, as you say, the more people you get, of course, it just dilutes. And yeah, you're gonna have some individuals who just do it so naturally they don't even think about it, and other ones who you sort of kind of have to remind. But we do sort of say like 10-20% of what you do is, the team and everything around that. We're not here to kind of celebrate our own success. We're here to celebrate as a team. We do a good deal. Like almost every person in the company got involved in that, even if you were the lead. So that's pretty important for us.
Is that counter industry culture, do you think? Because that sort of, it feels finance from the outside, maybe a bit more sort of individual hero celebration, that sense of, and that's not saying every business, everyone doesn't get involved in a deal, but it feels like it's very much kind of, you have the heroes. Do you feel your culture is a slightly counterculture then to the sector, and the sort of like, it's everyone's success?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. You look at kind of carried interest, and normally it's like just the deal team. And that's a good example of like, we will celebrate those doing the deals, in a financial way. We've always tried to kind of share that out between everybody, whether that be kind of phantom or traditional carry, etc. But the headline being more about we all succeed together. Of course, there's going to be differences in the amounts, etc. But we're all there working towards the same goal. And I think when you first join a company, you are naturally so invested in it because it's small. But then as you get bigger and bigger, there's less of that, and understandably so, because you haven't had that kind of the history, and so I think it's just it's something that is very important to us. But yeah, it probably is slightly different, and I think a lot of people will say you need that healthy competition in the deal team, but I think we've still got that, because you're never going to take away from somebody going like, I bought this deal in, like, this is my deal, like, and we're not sort of saying, oh, don't celebrate your success and how brilliant like you've been. We generally on our team meetings and all the feedback will be to that working group, or highlighting if somebody, got into a really difficult deal and all that sort of thing. But there is that underlying element that is about team as well. And you've got to work together, because, we will be greater as a team than a lot of individuals, working blind.
So actually stacking sort of your values and your reward system and what you're trying to achieve, it's try and get it all working together. Because that carry example sounds like quite a nice example of really having quite clear what your values are in terms of that team, people first bit, but then actually walking the walk, going, okay, we're actually going to reward people who wouldn't traditionally get rewarded.
Yeah, I think it is changing. I think if you look at like the platform teams and things like that, historically they wouldn't have got carried interest, but now from what I see, they are. And it's not an exact science, but the intent behind it all is, if someone didn't, well, maybe, you give them a bigger bonus because the performance of the year was really good. But it's just making sure, like, if you have a really good year, everybody knows about it. And whether that's, a better offsite. We did a really great offsite last year. They're not all going to be as good as last year's. I'd say I surpassed myself, but as the organizer. But those sorts of things would be impacted if you had a really good year. It's like, right, well, or a team outing or away day. Let's put some more budget into that and things like that. So it's kind of an approach from many angles to just make sure that people kind of are aware that we're succeeding together.
Well, actually, because we talked through sort of my no excuses framework sort of before Christmas, and we got and that looks sort of behaviour versus performance, and how under behaviour is more detrimental than underperformance. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes. So I think you can't, as an organisation, create, here's the ultimate list of behaviours. I think you can sort of have some underlying behaviours that to go with your kind of cultures as such. But I think it's definitely harder to change. Some people's behaviours are the way they are, and you can't change that. I think performance, you can go, right, let's spend more time with you, we'll send you on a course, like, where do you feel like you're lacking, how can we help you? I think behaviours you can definitely talk to, but of course you can sort of improve things, and because sometimes it's just a lack of self-awareness and things. It's very small tweaks that actually make a huge change, and suddenly, there's not an issue anymore. But I think other times it's just not the organisation for you, and that's okay, because there will be an organisation that is perfect for you, that has exactly the kind of culture and behaviours that work for you. So I think it depends on you as an organisation and what you care about. And if you do care about both, I think it's a really useful framework to think about somebody's, their performance for the year ahead. What areas, should we work on together? And if someone's progressing, what do they need to do to progress? Because it's not just doing more deals type thing. And so I think it's useful to use it as a framework to talk to. But it's not so prescriptive that, because the problem is you give too much information and then people are like, oh, well, I've done this, so what now? And sometimes it's not quite as straightforward as that.
So let's say you had someone who was absolutely killing it on the deal side, and then from behaviour sort of part wasn't lined up with the company, and you had a series of conversations around behaviour as you would do. What would then be the outcome?
I mean, for us, it would impact your progression in the company, basically, because you're not going to be able to progress to the next level if you're not a team player, let's say, or you're not embodying those kind of cultural behavioural values. So it would probably just become that point where it's like, well, let's have the discussion together. Like, do you want to progress, and if so, how do we work together? But as I said, it might not be the place for them. So I think it's but it's not an easy decision. It's not just like, it's not. It is definitely discussed, but it is important to us, and I think holding ourselves accountable as partners to that is important, because back to my original point of the fairness and the impact on the team, because if you start saying, oh, well, those behaviours are acceptable because your performance is high, well, what does that say to everybody else? I just don't think we want to be that kind of company.
But it's interesting, you hear quite a lot about performance improvement plans. You very rarely hear about behaviour improvement plans.
Yeah, it's very true. And performance improvement plans, not a fan of that. But you're right. Yeah, it should very much be a part, of how you structure those.
I think it's quite. I mean, it's easy to say. I think conceptually, you would let someone go, but you've got someone who's producing, I don't know, 50% of your revenue or deal flow, or is a key performer in some other aspect. I think it can be quite hard. But I think so. You've got to really believe that behaviour side is critical to your future success, and the impact on everyone else is. So you're willing to take that risk in terms of if there's not a change in behaviour, then there will be a change in person. I say it's probably not sort of overnight, and so it gives you time to put other things in place.
Yeah.
And it's even fair to have the conversation. I think that's the other side. Often we don't have the conversation because we're not comfortable having the conversation, or just don't have the language or are equipped to have it.
Yeah, and I think it probably goes on for a lot longer. If you think if it was performance, it would probably be quite a swift process. If it's behaviours, it's going to last a lot longer, because I guess with performance you'd have, peaks and troughs, etc. But I think, because you're always going to think, oh, well, maybe it'll get better. We're sort of putting things in place, it'll get better, and, maybe it won't. I think it does. It does take a lot of you have to be quite firm in knowing what the organisation stands for, and I think it's not that easy.
No, and as you say, it can change at different stages.
Yeah, definitely. We're a great believer in kind of certain people for certain stages of the journey, etc. And I think that's harder in a small business, because one of the downsides of being a small team is there's almost a kind of family environment, and so it's a real impact when people do leave, but also giving feedback and things can be taken sort of harder almost, because it's from people who are sort of almost your friends type thing, and you do a lot kind of socially and things like that. So I think there's challenges that come with that for sure.
Yeah, you're around each other a lot. You feel grateful that you've experienced you're bonding, going through the trauma of sort of growing a business.
Yeah, and I think the potential for people to be more hurt, we've definitely had that, in the past, because of that kind of close-knit environment.
It's interesting, someone was saying the other day that they thought you should do almost like a zero-based org chart every 3 years, and just look and go, what does your business actually need now? And I'm very familiar with like zero-based budgeting in finance, but I thought it was quite a challenging. I see the idea behind it. It feels like a very challenging thing to do, to go, because it might flag some people that actually are not right for that next step. I think we're always prone to like build our strategy around the people we have rather than what the business might need.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing to do. We do it, but I would say the challenge comes when you then try and kind of look at the team then around that, because emotions get involved, and people, and it's just more blurred. So I think it's a really important exercise to do, and I think everyone should do it, because it just, if nothing else, it sparks conversation, it makes you think about things, and it helps you grow the organisation in the right way, and just kind of highlights things to be aware of, and as a management team. But I think it's quite hard to then sort of put that on top of the current org and make the hard decisions.
I used to do business turnaround early in my career, and actually I think when you go in and you have no emotional ties, you have sort of perspective, you have clarity, you're willing to make decisions because you don't feel that personal pain quite as much. And you see there's often this very rapid change in both profitability and performance, because you've kind of, businesses sometimes need this refresh and just opening up to a new direction. But then when you've been in the same business, and I've done this myself, you're in 3 years, 5 years, it's almost too hard to make those changes, because you know the emotional backstory of someone's family situations, how much someone's tried over the years, like how much of a team player they've been, etc. Like you almost know, well, if you do know you might not know what you need to do because you're too close to it. But if you do know what you need to do, it can be almost too hard to do it.
Yes, and I find as a chief of staff, I come across that all of the time, not necessarily just in sort of our team, but in terms of, people for our portfolio or deals we're doing, and I can kind of come in and challenge things because I'm not in the detail or I'm not emotionally invested. So I think it's hugely useful to have that challenger. So, whether that's kind of an advisor or whether it is, a consultant or somebody who's just not emotionally invested, to help you make the hard decisions. Sounds harsh, but
well, I think also requires quite a trust, because I think often you can feel quite defensive of your team as a fan. Like you like to think you have the best team, you like everyone's doing the right things. Actually, someone say, "Oh, what about this?" But even just that question can be quite triggering, because it's like you can't they're all safe. I want to look after them.
Yeah, and there's always going to be a bias. I mean, we're between Singapore, London and New York, so there's always going to be a bias of, who you work closely with in a team or who you sit next to or those sorts of things. And so you have to kind of get over that as well. And, I think we tried to keep everything quite global and not go down to individual kind of offices, which works for now. I'm sure as you get bigger, it doesn't work quite so well. But at the moment, we do think of it as a sort of global organisation, and that's how we kind of grow the organisational sort of chart, etc.
I think also that's why having a simple framework around behaviour and performance can make some of those decisions a bit more objective, because you're having this you can map people using the same sort of rating system. One of my clients recently were doing it, and they were making some redundancy decisions. Actually, they mapped people using the no excuse framework, and they thought it was going to be a difficult decision, but actually once they had all the 3 people involved in the decision in there, and they all gave them the grade, so actually it was quite clear. So it became quite a difficult. I mean, it's still difficult because you're having a conversation around people's livelihoods and there's an emotional attachment. But at least it gave a data-based approach to going, oh, actually, no, we all think on the data we've given this person the same scores. This is the person. Yeah.
And how many of the people that you work with use sort of matrices both as on a management side and on the employee side, i.e., I know...
Visible.
Yeah.
So I would say that of the people that use it, I would say 80% at the moment is kind of invisibly. But what happens over time is that visibility creeps down the organisation. So I start working with a founder. They start using it to start evaluating their management team. They then might make some changes based off that analysis. Once their management team is then in a place where they like it, they then start sharing the concepts with their management team. Then the management team might start using it visibly to make some conversations with their team.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that, then actually you can start sort of telling everyone about it, because actually then everyone's really in sync. Everyone's in the same framework.
Yeah.
And the great thing is actually even people at the front line can use it, because just because you don't have anyone, let's say, that you're managing directly, you're still managing suppliers, colleagues, sort of clients. The framework still applies in terms of looking at performance and behaviour. So I think once you can get it visibly, that's the most powerful. But it can be a bit confronting sometimes to jump straight into it.
Yeah, and that's why I think if you start this early, it's so much easier. When you're starting the business, think about this stuff, get these foundations in, and then it doesn't become contentious, or you don't have the sort of big challenge around it because it's just been there since the beginning. That doesn't mean it's not going to change and evolve, but I think it's a lot easier than kind of bringing it in post. I think you of course you can do it, you just need to put a lot more time and effort into it and think a lot more about the communication, because I agree the value is when it's completely visible, but I think that needs a lot of work once you're a certain size to kind of bring that in without people kind of fearing things, etc., and worrying about things.
And I agree. I mean, my first client ever used it. They were at Series A and doing it. They said, "We wish we'd done this." I mean, there were 120 people going. It's actually harder to roll something out to 120 people. Wishing they'd done it earlier, because then they would have made some very different decisions, I think, on that journey. And would they even have been 120? I think something that we've talked about is how often you could overhire because you start sort of covering up underperformance, underbehavior with more hires, which is dangerous from a cost and actually effectiveness perspective.
Yeah, and I think you need the right balance as well. You could come as the consultancies where it's like every quarter, you're given a number and it's all very, very structured. And I think, we wouldn't want to go as far as that personally anyway. But I think people need to know where they stand, know what they're working on. It all just helps with that kind of motivation, enthusiasm, feeling engaged, working as a team, etc. So I think it's we definitely do better on it, and it's something I've finally got an HR person, which having held the pen for 12 years, I'm very excited about. So it's something that we're going to put more time into in the coming year.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on finding getting your HR person.
Thank you. Long time coming.
So if there's one thing that sort of founders listening could do today off the back of this, what would you suggest?
I mean, I would always say carve out some time for it, because that's the hardest bit. There's never a good time to sit down and do this people stuff, because there's always time sensitive, deal related work going on, or things that, seem more important. But I would say if you put the time aside to actually put some structure around this, it will pay off, 10 times over.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your insight from the VC side.
Thank you.
And look forward to chatting more.
Great.
Such a good episode today. I loved Rachel's insights on how they've tied their remuneration not only to performance but also to their behaviours. We will see you next Wednesday for the next guest episode, or Monday for the Peer Effect Postbag with Freddie. As ever, if any questions, just drop us a line at hello@peer-effect.com or reach out on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening and happy scaling.